Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. This time we're going to continue reading First Night in Barracks. There followed the longest, strangest toweling Renny or the others had ever been through. Their own rumps, it turned out, were barely in reach, and the best way to reach yours was to crouch down with your horse body hunched and curled like a cat before a mouse hole, not a very equine pose, and reach around first to one side, then the other. This, Rennie remarked late in the proceedings, is the first time I've grabbed my own tail. He toweled it. Is that an achievement? Asked Darnley, smiling for the first time since Rennie had met him. Possibly, he deadpanned. A puppy or a kitten couldn't do it if it was as new as we are. It's another new sensation anyway. That reminds me. He laid the towel aside and uncrouched halfway. That is, with his rear legs still seated, he stood up on his front legs. This position must have a name, he thought, but he didn't know it yet. If I'm a baby, and we all are as far as these shapes go, I'm going to play with my toes, get a good look at them. And he did. There were, of course, only 4 toes, 1 to a foot, but they were big ones. He lifted his right foreleg and took the hoof in his hands, turning it, prodding, poking. Danny sat next to him and started to do likewise. Darnley laughed, then Fells, then the others, and soon they were all seated on the wet concrete. It turned into an anatomy lesson, with Danny telling them the names of the parts. Frog, Renny exclaimed in mock outrage. This groove is called a frog? Not the groove, said Danny, the sort of triangle the groove is in. The groove is called the cleft. So I have cleft frogs in my feet? We all do. Danny stared at him, half smiling, making sure he was still kidding. To reassure him, Renny burst into laughter. Darnley, who had been playing with his toes with the rest, asked, does anyone else have a kind of double vision about their legs? Double feeling, maybe? They all stared at him. We've got double the number of legs now, Fells agreed, clearly wondering where this was going. I mean, sometimes when we're walking around, I just feel like I'm on all fours, and other times it's like the front legs are big arms and I'm going on all fours. I mean all fours the way I did before, hands and knees, and upright at the same time. He was wilting under their continued stares. Do your forelegs feel like arms for anyone else? He concluded. Not until now, Weldon said irritably. Puzzled, Fells asked, why do you care how it felt to anyone else? Look, burst out Carlin, they're my front legs and my back legs. They don't feel like anything. They're just there. Gah, this is like telling someone to notice their tongue. Renny and Danny laughed, but Renny stopped when he saw Darnley was staring at the cement floor, a flush of embarrassment over neck, face, and chest. I'm going to bed, Carlin declared. He rose, wobbled a bit, and went back to the stalls at a careful stagger. I'd better go too, said Fells. I've got to get some sleep. Weldon followed him out. Darnley sighed and muttered something. Renny thought he caught, even transformed. Still, the big bay started to struggle to his feet. It's okay, Renny said quickly. I know what you mean. Right at the moment, right after I was hit, when I could first make sense of anything, well, I couldn't. I mean, I had 2 backs now, and it was like I was somehow lying down twice. And then I was standing up twice with the 4 legs. Me too, Danny added. And all I could do was thrash around. Did you see me? I tried to push myself up with my arms and used my forelegs instead. Then I tried to get on hands and knees and used my foreleg wrists for knees. The doctor was hovering around watching me. I wonder what he could have done. Are you afraid you're going nuts? Renny asked Darnley. Because I can't think of anything more normal than feeling weird right now. This is the weirdest day of our lives. Darnley stared at him thoughtfully and nodded. Listen, Rennie went on. How good do you feel? Never mind weird. Do you feel good? Comfortable? Healthy? Darnley's gaze shifted inward briefly, then he nodded. 'Cause I feel great! Rennie was surprised to find he had sprung to his feet, staggering. I know, this is the first time I can remember feeling this healthy, because I'm an expert on what sick feels like. And I'm not, and you're not. Danny clattered to his feet next to him. Yeah, don't worry, this'll be great. By now, Darnley was up. He gave them a tentative smile, thanked them, and made his way to his stall. Danny watched him go. You and me, he remarked to Rennie, are the only ones just plain happy to be here. You are right, pony boy, said Rennie. We are so lucky. They returned to their stalls. Just before they parted, Danny said, Pony boy? Hey, if all four shoes fit. Danny chuckled. Good night, horsepower. But Rennie still didn't feel sleepy. There had been something vaguely like an argument, though he could not say what it had been about, and the stimulation of the shower itself. He turned to his old standby breathing exercises. He arranged himself on his mat like an enormous cat before a hearth, human back upright but relaxed, and simply breathed. It felt different, of course, and each breath took much longer, but each was also perfectly unimpeded. It felt great. He reflected on Danny's words. Happy to be here. It occurred to Rennie that he had no problems. He didn't need help. He could do some helping. True, he was and would forever remain an 8-foot, 1-ton horse monster, which would have some drawbacks, but it would have advantages too, such as breathing, being enormously strong, and breathing. And right now, he had no problems. How many times could anyone say that any time in their lives? As the breathing became more automatic, he began hearing the others. There were slight, steady noises from Danny's stall. Maybe he was exercising. There was a tiny, scratchy noise of writing from Weldon's stall. Most of the noise came from Fell's, rolling, shifting, and sometimes sighing in the stall across from his. Fell's looked like he still had problems. Rennie weighed a ton. A few hours ago, his 2 human feet had been replaced with 4 hooves the size and consistency of bowling balls. The floor was wood, but by being slow and careful, he was able to get up and cross the aisle without much noise. If anyone had got to sleep, he didn't want to wake them. Fells sprawled on the mat, looking very odd. Rennie must have looked odd too, because Fells stared when he saw him. I'm sorry, Fells said sotto voce. Am I keeping you up? No, Rennie answered at the same low volume. I couldn't sleep either. Did you want to talk a while before you try again? I don't want to disturb anybody. We could creep outside. No one said we couldn't. I don't think I know how to creep yet, Fells said, curling up a foreleg and looking at the hoof. Yeah, I guess we're not designed for stealth, Rennie admitted, looking at his own forehooves. He tried to make the mental action that wiggled toes to see what would happen, but could not remember how. Rubber horseshoes, came Carlin's voice from the next stall. And some practice. That's all you need. And nobody's asleep. I hear us all moving. Rubber horseshoes, came Darnley's voice from across the aisle. Soon everyone was once again standing in the aisle or sitting in their stall entryways. I think we're all just too stirred up to sleep, said Weldon. I mean, he spread his arms, indicating their altered bodies. A sleepless night is no disaster, he told Fells mildly. He had spent many nights up, battling his lungs. I just don't want to be a rag in the morning, Fells said. It really gets me down, way down. Don't worry, said Danny. Horses don't need much sleep. And that carries over to us? Fells asked. Sure. How do you know? My big brother's in the cavalry too, been in for years. Well, 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 said Carlin. We can call you native guide. What do you mean? Asked Danny. Is anybody else here from an old cavalry family? Or a farm? Or anything horsey? Heads shook. You're the expert. Hell, you're the only one who knew we had frogs in our feet. He tapped a forefoot for emphasis. So only one of us is really into horses, Renny thought. I know why I'm here. Why are the rest of you? But Captain Fletcher and the others know way more than me, Danny protested. Renny recognized the panic of one who was far more used to being taught than to teaching. Yeah, but they aren't here at 1 in the morning, said Carlin. All of us know a bit from the inside about what it's like to be a horse now, Renny told Danny, but you're the only one who knows about horses from the outside. Well, okay, what do you want to know? There was a pause. He had already told them not to worry about their insomnia. How do we sleep? Asked Weldon, when we can sleep. I mean, what position do we take? Oh, there are lots. For just dozing, there's this. Danny came out into the aisle, wobbled his legs out into a splayed position, folded his arms, then leaned back until his human spine could curve no further. Or you can get down and do that on the floor. He half crashed to the floor, gathered his legs under him in the cat-like pose, and leaned back. Or you could lean against the wall. Ah, said Weldon, that's why there's a mat on the wall next to the mat on the floor. Right, or you can just lie on your side. I guess the only position that's out is lying on your back. Danny laughed and rolled over onto his back. This left all four legs pointed crookedly at the ceiling. Yeah, that doesn't work very well anymore. He thudded onto one side, then struggled to his feet again. Carlin joined in the laughter, but then asked, so when we're out in the field, are they going to work us for 20 hours a day or something because we can do all our sleeping in two? Oh no, Danny assured him. There's sleep and then there's rest. I mean, if anybody has a chance to rest, we'll get our chance too, but there might not be a chance for anyone, not in the field. Carlin nodded, satisfied. So what do we do now? Asked Fells, and the tone of his voice was different enough that Rennie turned to look at him. He was actually smiling a little, looking relieved. Danny's news about sleep apparently meant a lot to him. You heard the expert, said Carlin. Rest. He fetched his phone, then sank again onto his mat and started playing a game. Rennie privately considered this a waste of your first night transformed, but maybe Carlin needed to be soothed. Rennie didn't. He was still just rejoicing. He knelt in his entryway and listened to the others chat. For the most part, the chat was Fells, Weldon, and Darnley quizzing Danny about the drills and classes ahead, and Danny answering from the knowledge passed down from his big brother Ed. Rennie reflected that Ed was now big brothering a whole barracks full of recruits, by proxy. A lecture on the virtues of draft horses came to an end. Hey, Rennie said, I'm a draft horse, aren't I? I mean, in my horse nature. How much of that applies to me? A moment later, he realized this was almost fishing for compliments, since Danny had just described draft horses as patient and sweet-tempered with a lot of common sense. Of course, these must also be the horses he had described as marshmallows earlier. Perhaps fortunately, Darnley took the conversation in a more general direction. Yeah, they hint in the recruiting literature that there are psychological changes. And the articles I found on transformation said it straight out, at least when it's the deep kind, transubstantiation. And this is. Do any of you feel like your personality has changed? You are one for twisty questions, aren't you? Said Weldon, sounding irritated again as he had when Darnley brought up how they perceived their new legs. This time, Darnley folded his arms and snapped back, occupational hazard. I minored in philosophy. He looked around at the others. Well, do you? No, said Carlin without looking up from his game. I think it's too soon to tell, Fells said. I feel shook up, but I expected to. It's a natural consequence. I hope. He broke off. Me too, said Weldon, with a look at Darnley that might have been an apology. But actually, I didn't expect to feel so much like me as I do. He essayed a smile. Is that philosophical enough? Darnley smiled back a bit sadly. Wherever you go, there you are, he answered. I, said Rennie, have never been so happy for so long. I don't know that that's a personality change. I think it sort of hides any changes there might be. But if I'm now like a draft horse, the way Danny describes them, I don't mind. He wanted to say to the others, I wish you could be as glad as I am. But he had probably already made them feel awkward. He thought a bit and instead asked Danny, did you see changes in Ed? Sure, he had more energy. He was more fun. Was he happier? Darnley asked. Yeah. And was he a happy person before? I guess. Yeah, he always was. So he was still Ed, the same basic personality. Maybe even more Ed than ever before? Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Well, I hope the results are that fortunate for all of us. Darnley shot a glance at Carlin. I have to admit, I'm with Fells. I feel shook up. And on top of that, I'm going to get twisty on you again. I feel so creaturely. There was a brief silence. Well, that's a word you don't hear often, Weldon ventured, but this time without snark. Rennie could not recall ever having heard it. I mean, Darnley went on, I've just been reshaped, remade. We all have. And it brought home to me how I could just as easily be so different from what I am, even more than this bodily transformation. I mean, suppose Wardley is now patient and wise, and he wasn't before. Rennie jerked his head back in surprise at finding himself made an example. I don't think, he began, and suppose each of us has had changes that big. It's a lesson, I guess. We can be changed. We could have been made otherwise. There's nothing necessary about the way I am. I feel very small. That's a little odd, said Weldon, since you're the biggest one here after Wardley. But I think I know what you're getting at. Maybe. Is it a philosopher's job to make people feel uncomfortable? Darnley gave him a black-humored grin. That's an interesting philosophical question. I shall throw something at you in a minute. Rennie decided he had just seen the birth of a friendship. I think I understand too, he said. It's like I've been redefined. Before, I was the guy who can't breathe. That was my definition, who I was. Not anymore. I suppose now I'm that huge creature, he laughed. At the back of his mind, he was considering that little jerk of his head when Darnley had surprised him. It was not a gesture he had used before. He had reared, he realized, like any startled horse. Just a little, but he had. Suddenly, he knew exactly what Darnley meant by feeling creaturely. To some degree or another, his mind and feelings had been redesigned. He had asked for this, but he was not the one who had done it. Of course, horses don't rear at a surprising turn in the discussion. He gave himself some humanity points for that. Those are just social definitions, though, said Darnley, bringing Rennie back to the discussion. But they rub off on you, Weldon replied. Even if you fight them, they're in your mind while you fight. And I am that huge creature, Rennie said. I don't mind. It's way better than being that guy who had trouble breathing till he died of it. He gazed at Darnley, who seemed to poke at ideas as if they were caught in his back teeth. Are you worried about losing your identity? And shouldn't you have thought about that before? Oh, no. In fact, I hope. Then, like Fells, he stopped. Well, thought Rennie, I'll be rooming with these guys for months. I expect I'll hear all about it eventually. And we draft horses are patient. Is there a problem? He asked Darnley. Carlin laid aside his phone. The problem is he's a worrier. He worries about how his new legs feel, about his sides twitching, and about his personality, and about being a creature or whatever. What is it with you? He yawned. I can't wait until morning. Darnley stared at the floor, blank-faced. Of course, he said flatly. I didn't mean to keep people up. Rennie felt another equine impulse to kick Carlin. You're not keeping the rest of us up. If Carlin wants to sleep, fine. We can go to someone's stall and talk quietly there. Then Danny yawned. In an internal act of blatant favoritism, Rennie did not wish to kick him. Instead, he sighed. It is getting near 2, Fells noted. Not important unless you're sleepy, Rennie reminded him. Are you worrying? He asked Darnley. And what if he was? The only connection Rennie had to him was that they had stood in line together to be transformed. Which, come to think of it, was a strange connection, but not an insignificant one. My brothers in transformation, he thought with an odd kick in the gut. Guts, fore and aft. Oh my. Rennie had no siblings. After him, his parents had not dared have more. Darnley made a deliberate effort and made his face come alive again. No, I am a worrier, but I'm not really worrying now. I just feel overwhelmed. It's normal to feel weird now, Rennie reminded him. I feel weird now, too. He felt excellent. Despite Fells and Darnley worrying, and Carlin and Weldon grousing, though Weldon was better now, and the conversation petering out, Rennie still felt as if his veins were bubbling. Nothing as big as I am, he thought, should feel so giddy. A good kind of weird. Darnley nodded. You're right, but it's wearing me out. I don't feel sleepy at all, just exhausted. Every time I move my legs or switch my tail or when anything touches my flanks, I can't help noticing how different it feels from anything I could have imagined. I just want a break from feeling weird. That could be a problem, Fells warned. Well, said Rennie, at least I understand your problem. I think it's the same for me, only I enjoy it. Darnley gave him a long, thoughtful look. Are you, Rennie thought, wondering if all my years of sickness are a fair price for the way I feel now? I wonder too, but that's not going to stop me feeling this. I know it will all feel normal eventually, Darnley said. I just want to be able to think about something else for a bit, or about nothing. Tell you what, said Fells, I have a guitar. If the others don't mind, I could play. You just lie quietly and listen. Maybe that will take your mind off the way your body feels. Thank you. Even if it doesn't work, thank you for trying. How about it? Asked Fells. Is it okay with the rest of you? Sounds good, said Danny and yawned again. As long as it isn't flamenco, Carlin said. He threw up one arm dramatically, snapped fingers, and clattered his hooves at random. I'd like to see us do that, but not tonight. Fells smiled. I promise, no flamenco. Rennie grieved a little to see the conversation break up, but decided a few minutes later that this was foolish. He was back in his stall, doing breathing exercises on his mat, relishing each inhalation. Fells, the guy so concerned to get to sleep, was staying awake to fill the barracks with a slow, wandering, almost tuneless melody. Rennie finally felt his excited happiness give way to peaceful happiness. Sleep did not seem impossible, though he still did not feel sleepy. The clock read exactly 2 a.m. Hooves rapped in the aisle. Weldon had been quizzing Danny about something at low volume, but they were done now, and Danny was finally headed to bed. He looked in Rennie's stall. Good night, horsepower. Good night, pony boy. And the script called for Danny to stumble down the aisle to his own stall. Instead, he blinked at Rennie and asked, What are you doing? Just breathing exercises. Are you doing anything special? Not a lot. You learn to breathe from your diaphragm is all. He looked back along his new sides. I think I have 2 now. I'm not sure what the back one is doing. Danny nodded, yawned, and apparently without noticing what he was doing, lay down on the mat next to Rennie. It was a wide mat, meant for large creatures to sprawl on. If one occupant was tucked up in cat pose, there was plenty of room. Danny was already asleep. Rennie stared for a moment, then went back to deep breathing. He felt the air stream into his chest and then on into the next chest somewhere. Plenty of air. All the air he could want. I am so lucky, he thought, or wondered, or prayed. I can breathe. I can breathe. I have a strong, healthy body. And I think I have at least one brother. The end.